Chapter 181. Different states. Back in the bedroom, Klein skillfully took out a candle mixed with sandalwood and placed it in the middle of the desk, facing the unresolved spiritual wall. Then, according to the process, he lit the candle with spirituality, sprinkled the essential oil, pure dew, and herbal powder symbolizing good luck and mystery, saw the flickering flame repeat the dim and bright states, and smelled the quiet and leisurely fragrance. Klein stepped back 2 steps, looked at the candle on the table, and shouted loudly in giant language, "Me!" After a pause, he changed Hermes' language way. "I call in my name. A fool who does not belong to this era, a mysterious master above the fog, and a yellow and black king in charge of good luck." In an instant, the flickering dim candlelight and the quiet and carefree fragrance interweave into an illusory vortex, which absorbs the spiritual vortex crazily. When Klein finished reciting the mantra, the whirlpool became a palm-sized gray circle. After looking at it for a few times, Klein, who had no doubts, took 4 steps backwards and returned to the fog. Not surprisingly, he saw his own high-backed chair swinging around and around, which set off the strange symbols composed of some eyes without pupils and some twisted lines. He took a deep breath, stabilized his mind with meditation, and reached out and touched the target. Almost at the same time, he heard the summoning mantra he had just recited, and saw that the surging spirituality and the rippling light lines stretched out an illusory door. Compared with the last time, this gate is completely shaped and covered with mysterious patterns, and these patterns are connected in series in the central position, showing the strange symbols behind the high-backed chair of Fool, which are composed of some eyes without pupils and some twisted lines. Looking at this illusory door that is shaking and waiting to be opened, Klein condensed his spirit and gave a strong push. Silently, the ever-changing gray mist and the majestic ancient palace seemed to have been thrown into the stone lake, creating ripples and circles and rushing in the direction of the calling door. Heavy friction whirran sounded, and the illusory and strange door suddenly cracked a crack. Through it, you can vaguely see the world behind it, with countless transparent shadows that are difficult to describe, and bright brilliance with different colors and endless knowledge. At this moment, Klein only felt that there was an unimaginable and irresistible suction inside the door, and the whole person threw it involuntarily to go. No room for consideration? No sooner had he emerged with the idea of consternation than his figure penetrated the gap and disappeared into the seclusion behind the door. The extreme dizziness of the head and the hissing roar that makes people close to madness gradually subsided, and Klein finally found his self-awareness. He saw in front of him a young man with an old shirt, dark hair and brown eyes, and ordinary facial features. The other person was of medium height and thin body, but seemed to contain a lot of strength. He was obviously bookish, but not gloomy at all. "Isn't this myself?" Klein is no stranger to such a scene. Every day when he looks in the mirror and arranges his clothes, he can encounter similar things. He nodded faintly, looked around with some understanding, saw his own bed covered with white sheets, saw the coat rack with half-height silk hat, tuxedo suit and black thin trench coat, saw the shelf with many books, saw the desk with only one candle left, and saw the candlelight with gray halo, and now he is floating in front of the palm-sized gray circle. So, I really summoned myself? Similar to the effect of the soul in vitro, but it seems a little different. Klein looked at the body that belongs to himself in front of him, looked at the empty eyes of him in a daze and lost in thought. However, he finally determined one thing, that is, only his own soul, that is, the spiritual body in mysticism, went to the fog, and the external performance was spirit-bodied. No wonder I can directly see the surface of spirit's body of justice, hanging upside down and sun above the fog, so as to determine whether they belong to the extraordinary and roughly judge their sequence. Well, my body seems to be protected to some extent from the protection of ritual power, and I can stand so firmly without losing my balance and collapse to the ground. Miss Justice should be similar to them. He looked back and tried to drive his own spiritual body that mixed some mysterious space forces. The slightly cold wind blew up and hovered in the bedroom. Klein enjoyed the taste of flying and circled again and again. Within the same city, I can also play a messenger once. I just don't know if I can carry real things. He controlled his emotions, stopped, floated in the air, and tried other abilities. He grabbed the notebook on the shelf, put the palm of his hand through it, and put it back, and there was nowhere to focus. It's a little sticky, which is different from penetrating air. When I'm stronger, or I can pry the power of the mysterious space above the fog more. Maybe I can do it. Klein tried the separate paper again, but still couldn't grab it. After thinking about it for more than 10 seconds, he flew to the coat rack, put his transparent and fuzzy hand into the pocket of the black trench coat, and touched the sleeping charm and requiem charm that were successfully completed for reimbursement. This is something that is mixed with his own spirituality. In the mysterious category, it is different from ordinary real matter, so Klein wants to try to carry them to his palm pass-through again, but he obviously felt the existence of the spell and the spiritual blending, but his strength was not big enough to pick up the spell. Of course, it can be put another way, that is, the spirituality of the spell is not strong enough to resonate strongly with his current state of existence. That spirituality is not strong enough. Klein turned thoughtfully to another pocket, which contained a Yangyan spell, made by stealing the power of God's blood and mixing with his own spirituality. The warm feeling quickly spread throughout his body, making his body more stable and his thoughts clearer. He picked up the thin piece of gold and took out his pocket. In the newly added mirror in the room, the spell floated out by itself, just like the description in many ghost stories. I can carry the sun's inflammation spell, and I can also speak directly with spirituality. Well, I have a certain strength in this state. Klein flew to the mirror and stopped in front, and saw that there was only a thin piece of gold in it. In addition, it was the furniture facing me and the darkness caused by the closed curtains. After thinking about it for a few seconds, he put the Yang Yen charm on the bed and returned to the mirror to try to get in. It was dark at the moment, and Klein's perspective suddenly changed. He saw all the pictures reflected in the mirror just now, and saw the things vaguely outlined in the dark environment, which made him feel that he was hiding in a hidden corner, peeping at less than half the room. Really can enter the mirror, but this is just an ordinary item, not leading to any mysterious and strange world. Klein nodded slightly, rushed forward, and returned to the room. The success of carrying the Yang Yen spell gave him great confidence, so he tried to grab another item. That's a brass whistle from Ask. As soon as he touched this ancient and exquisite object, Klein felt his spirituality expanding and freezing in Horand. Suddenly, his illusory eyes turned into a burning flame, a dark flame. It seems a little strong, and the state is closer to the hatred of the soul, but there is no such strong resentment. Klein's spirit of precipitation reflects his current appearance. This is the ability of Clown. Mr. Ask's bronze whistle is really amazing. He nodded his head and found that he could pick up a certain weight of paper, and there was no doubt that the sleeping spell could be used. Unfortunately, the ceremonial silver dagger can be carried, but the revolver is too heavy to grab. Klein ended his attempt in this field and turned to study whether the current state has the ability to cast spells. After careful experiments, he determined that he was summoned to have two kinds of magic abilities. One is to directly shock the soul of the target with invisible roar, and the other is to create a similar frozen effect through contact. Satisfactory to stop, Klein turned his attention to the protruding belly window, to the sun and the street covered by the curtain cloth. I don't know if I can move during the day. He muttered and floated to the window. Then, Klein carefully pulled the curtain to reveal a gap and let a little sunlight penetrate the spiritual wall and shine into the bedroom. In this brilliant sunshine, Klein found that his spirit was steaming black fog, and his strength was fading a little. He quickly let go and let the curtain cover the light again. I can't. Klein pondered for a moment and looked at the Yang Yen spell on the bed. If there is the blessing of the eternal sun, will it get a different effect? He floated to the bed and tried to grab the thin piece of gold. However, as soon as he touched the target, the warm and pure feeling clashed with his own inflated and cold spirituality, just as water and fire could not coexist. He left the gold piece in his palm like a scald. Mr. Aski's bronze whistle and the Yang Yen spell can't exist in my spirit at the same time. Klein put the bronze whistle in a sensible way, let his own spirit shrink, and let the black flame in the eye socket go out. In this state, my ability of 2 kinds of spells has weakened. After some experiments, Klein grabbed the Yang Yin spell and once again felt the stability and warm baptism of the spiritual body. He went back to the window and carefully opened a gap in the curtain. The sun shone in, shining on him. Only warmth, no harm. Good. Klein smiled heartily, penetrated the spiritual wall, and flew outside carefully, intending to do more experiments. Chapter 182. Romer Klein in Tingen in early September. The weather has changed from cool to slightly cold, but the sunshine at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon still makes people feel warm. Klein floated in the air outside the bedroom through the spiritual wall and the protruding belly window, overlooking the pedestrians and carriages coming and going in the Narcissus Street. Just then, a man in gray-blue worker's clothes suddenly looked up. Klein was startled and wanted to hide in situ, but he couldn't find a suitable cover at the moment. Turning around, he saw that there was no other way, but he tried to get home, but he swept out of the corner of his eye, only to see that the man's eyes just swept through the window on the second floor, always following a sparrow, and was finally dumped with regret in downtown Tingen. Birds can be seen occasionally. I forgot that ordinary people can't see me at all. Klein is relieved and feels that he hasn't fully adapted to the current state. With confidence in his heart, he lowered his flying height and approached a fairly wide street, just floating above the heads of pedestrians. As soon as the distance got closer, Klein immediately found that his vision was slightly equal to second sight's, so he didn't need to open it anymore, but it was limited in scope. In addition to the aura and emotional color, he also vaguely noticed the existence of the soul of every pedestrian, hazy, illusory, and transparent. Now I seem to be able to go directly through the body and attack the soul. Klein nodded thoughtfully. He circled once, ready to test the limit speed, so he tried his best to fly to Iron Cross Street. Before long, he stopped and returned to the outside of the apartment where he used to live. There should be the speed of an ordinary car in a previous life, the kind that runs at a high speed normally. Alas, you can't enter and leave the spiritual world freely, otherwise it will be perfect. However, if you get lost in the spiritual world, the consequences are said to be very serious. Klein just finished his self-assessment, and he felt depressed, gloomy, and unspeakable. He looked around and saw that there was a dark color that normal people could not see, and the sun was hard to disperse. The remaining emotions such as numbness, despair, and pain were superimposed on each other, just like the essence, like what I experienced with inspiration after I was promoted to soothsayer last time. The middle street and the lower street of Iron Cross Street have never changed. I don't know how many years it will take to accumulate such depression and gloom. Klein sighed and flew to the position of 3 floors before thinking of it. Here, he finally felt the sunshine and got rid of the depressed mood. Klein flew down the street, and from time to time, he could see residents with rags, numbness, and malnutrition, and even met 2 normal deaths, both of which belong to the type of long-term hunger, poor health, and sudden illness. That I don't know how many people will die in pain here every month. However, the bankrupt farmers and the former slaves coming from the southern mainland will soon fill their positions. Klein silently spit out a sigh, changed direction, and flew to the southern district. There is the industrial zone of Tingen City, where the steel plant, lead and white factory, ceramic factory, printing factory, metal manufacturing factory, and machinery manufacturing factory are next to me, and I am next to you. As he flew, Klein saw the towering chimney-type iron furnace, the diffuse dust, and the thick gloom that was only a little better than the next street. Here is full of fatigue, pain, pessimism, numbness, and other emotions, and workers in their 30s belong to the minority. Just as Klein was about to lower his height and observe the area carefully, he suddenly felt weak from the inside out. My spirituality can no longer support this state. Klein was surprised in his heart. He was in a hurry to return home, and immediately thought of a better possibility. I was summoned, and when I finished summoning, I naturally returned. He calmed down, carefully sensed his own state and surrounding environment, and not surprisingly found that somewhere infinitely high and infinitely close had a subtle connection with himself. Following this connection, Klein tightly wrapped the Yang Yin spell and gave a strong idea to end the call. The huge and horrible suction came, and his transparent and almost invisible figure jumped and disappeared into the material world. Endless gray fog filled with silence, unreal and still. Crimson stars flashed, and Klein reappeared in the towering palace like a giant's residence, and appeared on the head of the ancient and mottled bronze long table. That's the whole process. And Klein's eyes are now surprised to look at his own spiritual body, only to see a warm and pure thin gold piece wrapped inside. Yang Yan's spell. I really used my own way of calling myself to bring the real matter into the fog. He took out the spell with a hard smile and played it repeatedly to make sure it was not a virtual product. Klein stood up, took a few steps with great ambition, and thought in anticipation. Sure enough, materials and items can also enter this mysterious space, as long as you can find the right way. However, this way is more complicated, and it needs to be turned around to achieve the goal, and it is always called by members, which will damage the image of fools. Only I can use it myself, or after learning more, I can design a mantra that calls for fools' families but also points to me. Am I a natural coolie? Why do mantras have to point to myself? At that time, I can get a messenger-like but more special household to receive and give materials. Klein has a lot of thoughts and ideas, but due to his strength and knowledge level, it can't be realized for the time being. The weakness became more serious, and Klein dared not stay any longer. Wrapped himself in spirituality and simulated the feeling of falling into the fog. In a blink of an eye, he returned to the bedroom and saw the bright sunshine shining through the gap in the curtain cloth. He looked at himself and made sure that the Yang Yan spell had not been brought out and remained on the fog. When I have a good rest, I will repeat the previous summoning ceremony in the early hours of the morning and take the Yang Yan mantra back to the real world. Hey, if only that state could be maintained for a long time so that I can check the houses with red chimneys more quickly. Unfortunately, it's not yet possible. Just flying for a while, I'm afraid I'll have to go back to the fog and rest for a long time, which is equally inefficient. Klein went to the desk and put out the quietly burning candle, packed up his things. He didn't immediately lift the spiritual wall, but sat down, dug out paper and pen, and began to write letters. Letters to Mr. Ask. After writing, "Dear Sir," I looked up and considered for a few minutes. Klein put pen to paper and said, I recently received an information that Chi Lin Gus, one of the 7 pirate generals, sneaked into Backlander. He was pregnant with a magical item called Creeping Hunger, which can provide a similar ability to Shepherd, and Shepherd is a special person who devours different souls and obtains a kind of ability. It is said that the number of souls they graze at the same time is limited, but it can be replaced. Chi Lin Gus has many extraordinary abilities, and I don't know what he wants to do in Backlander. Intelligence shows that this may involve a very important and magical item, which is enough to make Chi Lin Gus a high-sequence strong person, or an item comparable to a high-sequence strong person. Klein roughly described the story of Chi Lin Gus with the help of fictional intelligence sources. Anyway, he believed that it was impossible for Mr. Ask to go to the captain of the Night Watchman for verification. Here, he didn't ask for help directly, but it seemed to be mentioned casually so that the other party could be careful. Whether or not you will ask Mr. Ask to help you later, it can't be wrong to pave the way first. If there is such a day, it will not be abrupt. Klein slowly spit out a sigh and began to write the main contents of the letter. The Black Hand behind the scenes has not taken any further action, and I still haven't found any relevant clues. I rashly contact you. Mainly want to ask you about the knowledge of sacrifice ceremony. I met something similar in a recent task, with the description of the sun and the comparison of Mr. Ask's answer. I should be able to try this sacrifice ceremony, which in turn is giving. This will be more suitable for the exchange of materials and articles than the ceremony of calling myself. Well, I hope Mr. Ask remembers this knowledge. Klein nodded slightly, put down his pen, and didn't sign it. There is only one bronze whistle, and he is sure that Mr. Ask will not mistake the sender. Therefore, Klein is careful not to leave his name. Folding the stationery, and looking at the height of about 3 meters, he picked up the copper whistle from the bed with a little hesitation. Right, let it squat to receive letters. Klein emphasized in his mind, raised his right hand, put the bronze whistle to his mouth, puffed up his cheeks, and blew a sigh of relief. The brass whistle didn't make a sound, but Klein keenly felt that the surroundings suddenly became cold. He opened the second sight and saw one after another on the desk, like a fountain of bones with hazy luster, pouring higher and higher. These bones quickly coalesced into an illusory and huge monster, and its head went into the spiritual wall, and I don't know where it reached. Looking at the bones, thighs and body in front of him, looking at the hanging arm and the open right palm, Klein's mouth twitched and threw the folded letter paper up. Bones' huge hands swept away, firmly holding the letter. At this time, Klein did not hesitate to pick up the bronze whistle again and blew it. The monster disintegrated in an instant, turned into bones and fell on the desk, and disappeared without illusion. After all this, Klein removed the spiritual wall and hobbled to the coat rack in the sudden blowing wind, putting the bronze whistle back in its original place. Then, he ran quickly to the bed and fell headlong. As soon as his body touched the soft bed, the whole person had already passed out. Chapter 183 Psychic Course. After dinner and chatting for a while, Klein sat down on the single-person sofa in the living room, picked up the Joni Aho Tile Evening News, which had just been delivered, and began reading leisurely. Benson, with a bitter face, sat opposite his sister. In front of him was Bella's very clean dining table, which consisted of grammar books, classical literature, accounting tutorials, and pen and paper. Similar to him, Melissa also had textbooks and stationery, including but not limited to pens, papers, rulers, compasses, and so on. It makes me feel like I went back to more than 10 years ago, when I was a student in a church Sunday school. Benson complained, but still lowered his head and studied hard. Yes, this scene makes me feel a great sense of accomplishment as a parent. Klein smiled and said, "Knowledge changes destiny and strives to create brilliance." I just made up the second half of the sentence, and I don't know if Roselle ever said it. He secretly lamented. The room soon became quiet, except for the sound of a pen scratching across paper and books being turned. Bella had already cleaned the tableware and tidied up the kitchen and returned to her bedroom on the first floor, which was the original small guest room. Klein read the newspaper, drank Zybe black tea from time to time, and chatted with his brother and sister. He had a very pleasant time. Suddenly, the gas lamps in the living room and dining room dimmed at the same time, as if they had lost enough fuel. Benson and Melissa raised their heads in no particular order and looked at the lamps, trying to find out why. Klein also cast his eyes in the past. Just then, he felt something lightly touch his arm. Nothing in the living room touched his arm except him. As soon as Horance's hair exploded, Klein's arm shrank and turned to look, and he saw 5 tiny, pale fingers, which grew at the top of the red tongue and had irregular fangs one after another below. Klein first reached into his pocket, where there were sleeping and requiem spells, and immediately saw the 5 baby-like fingers clutching a neatly folded paper letter. Messenger. Klein suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. At this time, 5 pale fingers holding the paper gently touched his arm again. Klein looked at Melissa, who was about to stand up and check the gas lamp. She grabbed the writing paper with her left hand, then quickly retracted and hid under the newspaper. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw pale fingers, red tongue, and irregular fangs suddenly dim and disappear. A heart movement. Klein, tapping on the left tooth, quietly opened the second sight. He saw the 5 abnormally small fingers again, the long red tongue covered with white fangs, and they retracted into the transparent face without eyes, nose and nose on the ground. A second later, the face went underground, and the gas lights in the living room and dining room returned to normal. Strange. Melissa muttered, carefully checked for a long time, and found no problem. Why is the girl in charge of this kind of thing in our family, and the man is watching? Klein shook his head and closed second sight. When spiritual creatures are willing to be seen and have corresponding abilities, ordinary people can also find them. Just now, as an example, after talking to each other about gaslights, Maridi's family became quiet again, and Benson and Melissa plunged into the ocean of knowledge again. Klein, with the help of the cover of the newspaper, unfolded the stationery with one hand and sandwiched it in the inner page, reading the reply from Necromancer Daily. I must emphasize again that I prefer the title of Psychic. You asked, I give a positive answer. Yes, psychics can also be used in living creatures. Remember, not just living humans. However, it will be quite troublesome, and there is no small danger. The soul left by the deceased is pure, without too many impurities and chaotic thoughts. You can communicate without obstacles, ask questions, and get answers. Of course, you can also attach the skill of dream divination in this step and directly see the corresponding picture. The living human can't, and his own will still exists, resisting the communication between unprotected spirits. Seeing this, Klein's mouth twitched slightly, confirming that the respondent was Daly herself. Unprotected communication. It's really her style of speaking. Looking up at my sister and brother, Klein continued to look at the back. In the face of this situation, we have only two ways. One is to overcome each other's will and communicate rudely by relying on our strong spirituality and profound psychic skills. The other is to help each other relax with some drugs. My most commonly used ones are Amanda Pure Dew and Eye of the Spirit Potion. I'm sure you won't be impressed. After entering the formal psychic link, you must pay attention to that. Unlike communicating with the spirits left by the deceased, at this time, you're also in a spiritual state. Simply put, your spirituality has entered the spiritual world of the other party. Note that for professional psychics, there will be no shortage of self-protection skills in this state, but you can't. Even if I tell you those skills, you can't learn them or use them. So you must be sober enough and rational enough. Only in this way can you resist the storm of the other person's chaotic thinking and come to his spiritual body to communicate with him. Well, at this time, it is communication at the level of mental body. In this link, you also have two choices. One is to use skills to forcibly read each other's memories, but you must be very careful because you can't know whether what you read is what you want to know. If a person's huge memory is not received in a differentiated way, it is likely to crush your spirit, and it will seriously damage or even destroy the soul of the target. For non-professional psychics, I don't recommend this method. The second option is to communicate with each other's mental body, gently, whether by rough means or with the help of drugs. At this time, the target is bound to be in a muddled state, and it is almost impossible to lie. No, you can't recall what happened to you, although I know you can't remember. I'm sorry, Ms. Daly. I was sober at that time. Klein smiled in his heart and looked down at the back of the letter. This kind of communication can make you get the real answer, but not all the real answers. You should know what I mean. Anyone who has been exposed to journalism has heard of the famous saying of Russell the Great. I don't remember the specific content. The main point is to tell the truth. Just tell the truth. Tell the whole truth. In short, Lingdi doesn't necessarily remember everything because many memories are in his subconscious, even the collective subconscious. Oh, so you must know how to induce and be good at designing problems, do you understand? Specific skills are... All of the above are normal situations. What should we pay attention to when channeling a crazy, extraordinary person? Still awake enough and rational enough, there can't be a little trance, because the extraordinary person's spirituality is very strong, because the madman's spiritual body is also full of chaotic ideas. Let me give you an example. The normal person's consciousness is an island. The subconscious is the part of the island hidden under the sea, and the collective subconscious is the surrounding waters. The sky belongs to the spiritual world, while the extraordinary person's island has a controllable active volcano, while the madman's island has a volcano erupting. When you are in unprotected contact with the spirit of a madman, his chaos is likely to infect you, just like the polluted seawater will follow the ocean current and spread nearby. Well, channeling in this case is just like connecting your own sea area with each other's, so you must pay enough attention to the problem of infection. A few examples are that some psychics were careless and didn't do any protection when they did similar things, and then they developed mental illness with the same goal. Normally, mental illness is not an infectious disease, but in the field of mysticism, in the psychic world, it does infect people. It is necessary to keep yourself awake and rational and not be influenced by the chaotic thoughts of the other party. After that, it is necessary to induce questions and get answers. Crazy people can communicate effectively. If you want to try, I suggest you take the Tranquility Potion in advance. The formula is available behind the Chinese Gate in Tianjin, and the finished product is also available, which can effectively help you stay awake and rational when channeling. Of course, you can also ask Dunn to apply for assistance from the parish of Backlander. I would be happy to see the spiritual state of a psychologist in Sequence 7 after he went crazy. Sober and rational. This is my strong point. I can stay sober and rational when I am channeled. Of course, I am not an arrogant person. I will still apply for Tranquility Potion and demand a pure dew, and Eye of the Spirit potions. Klein relieved, some itching. He put down the newspaper, stood up, entered the bathroom on the first floor, lit the paper with spirituality, spilled the ashes into the toilet, and washed them away. That night, Klein tried his ritual of calling himself again and brought the Yangyan spell back to the material world and his bedroom at the same time. He didn't wait for the reply from Mr. Ask, who was expected to send it soon. Maybe he needs some time to recall his knowledge. Maybe he doesn't have time to reply for the time being, or he is afraid of disturbing my sleep. Klein lifted the spiritual wall, guessed several reasons, and went to bed. The next day, Tuesday morning, Klein entered Blackthorn Security Company and skillfully knocked on the door of the captain's office. Chapter 184 behind the door. Please come in. Dunn Smith's mellow and warm voice came out. Klein turned the handle and pushed open the door. He saw the captain enjoying breakfast. On his right-hand side, there was coffee with strong fragrance, and in front of him was white bread, toast, and bacon on a plate. Dunn put the leftover toast with butter in his mouth and silently pointed to the chair opposite the desk. Klein didn't disturb the captain's meal, smiled, sat down, and waited patiently. Seeing that he was not in a hurry, Dunn relaxed his straight back, took the coffee, took a sip, and swallowed all the food in his mouth into his stomach. He pulled out a soft tissue and wiped the corners of his mouth. What can I do for you? Klein seriously nods. I met Dast Guderian, the madhouse doctor and a member of the Psychological Alchemy Society. While talking, he swept away from the corner of his eye and found an open magazine in front of the captain. What information did he provide? Dunn shook hands and suddenly asked. Klein briefly described. He told me that before Hood Organ went crazy, he was visited frequently. That person was named Lannerwis.
Hello?
Dunn raised my hand and rubbed his forehead. I seem to have heard of it somewhere. It's the fraudster who took away at least 10,000 pounds. Klein reminded. Dunn thought seriously and shook his head to show that he had no impression. Captain, you are not sensitive to money at all. Klein condescension. Will Lon Erwu related things pick up? Key tells it again. The swindler lied that he had explored and bought an iron mine with high quality and high reserves, raised funds privately in Tingen City for development, and took away more than 10,000 gold pounds. A friend I met in the divination club suffered losses. In addition, a girl was deceived into getting engaged to him and pregnant with his child. He visited Hood Eugen several times before he went crazy. Dunn said thoughtfully. The extraordinary liar in Sequence 8? Thief that way. Captain, it's very kind of you to remember something similar. Klein, funny feeling, gently nods. This is also my guess. Because the steel company set up by Lannerwis is in the South District, the deceived people have all kinds of beliefs, so this matter was not transferred to us in the end. Even if the police department found some extraordinary traces, it was handed over to the penalty generation team. Dunn finally understand why, with quiet gray eyes looking at Klein Way. What do you want to do? Well, Captain, don't be so keen. Klein solemnly replied. I want to communicate with Hood Eugen by means of psychic ceremony and find out what Lannerwis wants with him, and whether this is the direct cause of his madness. Dunn slightly and said, even if you don't apply, I will make a similar attempt after I confirm that Hood Eugen is really crazy. However, Daly told me that this kind of thing has a lot of risks. Are you are sure? Or, if I apply for assistance from Backlander Parish, there should be no problem in delaying for a few days. Klein's main motivation to become an extraordinary person is to study the occult, find a way to go home, have the opportunity to do practice, and have strong confidence in himself, so he naturally doesn't want to give up. Captain, I have mastered this knowledge and have a certain grasp of it. Of course, I need the help of Amanda Pure Dew. Eye of the Spirit Potion and Tranquility Potion. Tranquility Potion. Dunn chewed the name and confirmed Klein's professionalism. He remembered that Daly said that it was a rare but very useful potion in the psychic field. After considering for more than 10 seconds, Dunn Smith leaned back and said, "Then you write an application and get the corresponding potion after going to Cheney's Gate. The amount. I don't know if there is any finished potion. If not, you can get the corresponding materials and prepare and refine them yourself." "Okay," Klein replied with delight, but he didn't get up and sat firmly in the chair. Dunn said, "Raise my hand and rub the eminence," carefully thinking way. "Starting in the afternoon, it's my turn to monitor the madhouse. We can't go directly to Hoodugin. No one knows whether there are still members of the Psychological Alchemy Club hidden among the doctors, nurses, handyman, and patients in the madhouse, and no one knows whether the Psychological Alchemy Club is also secretly monitoring Hoodugin. Our actions must be secret enough not to expose that Dast Guderian has become our informant. Let's go in the early morning and sneak in secretly. Well, I'll stay by and guard against accidents. This is for the best. If Hoodugin is just crazy, but I use psychic rituals on him, isn't it equal to turning into the zoo and dancing in front of the tiger?" Klein reassured and said sincerely, "Yes, Captain." He stood up and turned to the door. Just then, out of the corner of his eye, he swept the title of the magazine spread out in front of the captain. Keith Downing's tree sap in the southern continental rainforest has obvious effect of promoting hair growth. Klein pitied to look back, sliding door out of the captain's office. Suddenly, he flashed a funny idea. In fact, extraordinary people don't have to bother. If old Neil were still here, he would probably suggest designing a ritual magic for germinal growth, so as to pray for help from the goddess. As for whether it will grow full of hair and become a curly baboon in the end, that's another question. And how will the goddess react? If I were you, I would definitely say, "MMP?" This idea immediately infected Klein's happiness with sadness, which was full of funny feeling. He entered the civil service office, sat down in front of Ackerson 1346 mechanical typewriter, and Data completed the application when Dunn Smith signed his name and stamped his seal. He took the application, went deep underground, walked along the corridor illuminated by the gas lamp, and walked step by step to the Cheney's Gate until this time. Klein thought of a problem. This will be the first time he has entered that mysterious door. I don't know what it will be like behind the door. He stepped up with implicit expectation and came to the opposite black iron gate. First, I gave the application to Siga Tiong, who is on duty here today, to register. Klein took back a signed document and knocked on the door of Cheney's, only to feel that the echo inside was empty and far away. After waiting for dozens of seconds, he saw the heavy opening and creaking of the split door engraved with 7 dark emblems without hearing footsteps. Cheney's door was wide enough for only one person to pass, and then it paused. Klein also saw the nearby scene with the help of the gas lamps on both sides of the corridor. Behind the door stood an old man with deep wrinkles and sparse hair. He wore a black classical robe and carried a lantern. The dim light of candlelight shone through the glass, making the old man's expressionless face light and dark, making his light blue eyes seem to have frozen ice for thousands of years. "Files." He croaked out a word. Klein had seen the old man because at the end of the evening, he and his companions would come out of the Cheney's Gate, pass the watchroom, and turn to St. Selena's Church. They are old night watchmen and voluntary internal watchmen, but according to Klein, there are 5 such watchmen. This is my application. He handed the document in his hand to the old man in front of him. With a pair of light blue eyes, the internal keeper raised the lantern, looked at it carefully, and after confirming it, he retreated to one side and let Klein pass. Klein slowly entered the Cheney's Gate, and before he could look around, he felt an indescribable coldness. This is not the cold in winter, but the cold that makes people tremble spiritually. Looking up, Klein saw the candlesticks on the wall and saw the silver candles carved with patterns, and their burning flames all showed a deep blue color without any shaking. Cheap. The watchman closed the door of Cheney's, and it became extremely quiet all around. In front of Klein's eyes is a wide corridor, paved with old slates. There are stone doors on both sides of the aisle, which are marked with the words materials, potions, and materials respectively. at the end of the corridor. There is a downward staircase, which extends into the darkness, as if leading to the abyss. That there should be different seal points connected with different seals, which is said to be divided into several layers. I don't know which layer the ashes of Saint Selena are placed on. Quietly, in the early morning, the streets are deserted, and the carriages are running fast, sometimes straight and sometimes turning. Klein is thinking about Lannerwis, and he is in a trance. He saw that the colors in front of him suddenly became rich. Red was redder and black was darker, just like an abstract oil painting. Everything around slowed down, and the carriage seemed to enter a strange world. Klein brushed the Yang Yen charm and pulled out a revolver. Just then, a huge white bone palm reached through the window of the carriage and left the folded writing paper. With the retraction and disappearance of this palm, the oil painting scene of Horan returned to normal, and the carriage was still running smoothly on the street. Is really in a secret way. Klein waited for a while, looked at the writing paper at the foot, and his mouth twitched. Chapter 187 Asg's warning. Klein was shocked by the messenger for 5 seconds before he came to his senses and bent down to pick up the paper. Even if Mr. Asg can't use most of his extraordinary abilities because of amnesia, just sending this messenger can also deal with the extraordinary people of Sequence 7 or even Sequence 6. His heart reflected his stunned and envious expression. He didn't rush to unfold the writing paper, but put it in his closed pocket and put it with the sleeping spell and other items. The carriage moved on and arrived at Daffodil Street. When Klein walked out of the car door, he subconsciously looked at the driver Sizzle. He saw a smile on his face, his eyes were calm and relaxed, and he was unaware of what had happened before. Switch to second sight and look at it. Klein nodded his head and went back to his door. He looked at the balcony and tap water pipe on the second floor, hesitated for a few seconds, and decided to keep his manners and not try to climb. As for the clothes stained with blood spots, he will take them to Blackthorn Security Company tomorrow, and the police department will come forward and hand them over to a specific laundry girl, so as to avoid scaring the maid Bella and her sister Melissa. Before jumping out of the window on the second floor, Klein secretly unlocked the front door. At this time, in the dead of night, he took out the key, opened the door with almost no movement and quickly flickered, and after closing and locking the gate, he quietly breathed a sigh of relief, stepped lightly and returned to the second floor. Parked in front of the locked bedroom, Klein unhurriedly took out a tarot card, inserted it into the crack of the door, and simply disintegrated the locked state he had created in a special way. Then, he pushed the door in, locked his clothes, and completely relaxed, just like being a thief. Klein smiled and shook his head, unhurriedly took out his revolver and stuffed it under his pillow. After finishing the finishing work, he lit the gas lamp, took out the writing paper, sat down at the desk, and started reading seriously. I'm sorry to write back to you now. I've been busy following the footsteps of the past and having a party with my former teachers and classmates and chatting late. After reading your letter, I finally understand what happened in the last 2 days. First, the police came to search every room in my hotel, and then someone quietly turned around at night. Yes, I was talking about people with extraordinary abilities. Turned out to be the Hurricane Lieutenant Chi-Lin Gus, who often appeared in newspapers and sneaked into Backlander and made a lot of killings. I remember that he was not only wanted by our ruined kingdom, but also on the reward list of the Fuzak Empire, the Republic of Intis, and the Kingdom of Nepot. So, what's the reward? Klein subconsciously came up with this idea. He didn't get the answer because AZ Grams to mention other things. I feel familiar with the shepherd ability you described. I seem to have seen it somewhere and encountered it, but I can't remember it. This should be my previous life experience. I feel very bad and distressed because I can't complete my memories. Gee, Mr. Ask has a certain interest in Shepherd, which is the starting point for him to help. Well, it's just some coincidence. No, it's not a coincidence. It's inevitable. According to inference, Aski lived for more than 1,000 years, and he was probably a strong man with high sequences. Then, in his earliest life, he must have seen the extraordinary abilities of many sequences in his previous lives, and he was deeply impressed by the more special ones. In other words, not only Shepherd can make him have a similar familiarity, but also the Dark One, hunter, and guardian. As long as the magic items correspond to the ability of a certain sequence, then Mr. Ask will feel familiar and interested, which is an imaginable thing. Klein first wondered, then suddenly, and his heart was sure of Allah. His eyes down, continued to read. I recalled some of the sacrificial ceremonies you asked about a long time ago. It seems that I was very impressed. Perhaps in one of my lives, or in the earliest life, I was a priest. I must warn you in advance that you should be careful when using sacrificial ceremonies, and you should not pin your safety on evil spirits and some hidden consciences. They don't have such things. In addition, you should have a strong ability to distinguish, because the evil spirits and demons will create seemingly harmless identities for themselves. My opinion is that you can't sacrifice to your own unclear and uncertain existence, otherwise your soul will also become a sacrifice. In plain words, the evil spirits will wear vests and pretend to be easily trusted, just like in the online world. Behind the account of a seemingly cute sister, there may be a stingy man squatting. Even if we meet offline and confirm our appearance, we must be careful. Klein didn't ignore Mr. Ask's reminder because he sacrificed to himself, and he agreed to place his head. Ask emphasized the matters needing attention, and soon explained what he knew about the sacrifice ceremony. First of all, arrange the altar. To which god or abnormal hidden existence do you want to sacrifice? You can draw and carve the corresponding symbols, use herbs and minerals belonging to his field, and of course, you can also make holy oil, balm, incense, and other items in advance. Symbol? Klein paused and found himself, that is, a fool who doesn't belong to this era, and he didn't even know what his corresponding symbol was. When he thought about it, he quickly thought of the complex symbol behind the high-backed chair on the top of the bronze long table, which was composed of some eyes without pupils symbolizing secrecy and some twisted lines symbolizing change. This should be my symbol. To be precise, my symbol on the fog. The field is very simple, secret, change. Good luck, but I'm not sure. I can only try to get it. Well, even if the symbol is wrong, on the premise of your name being correct, the sacrifice target will not point to another existence, which will at best cause the failure of the ceremony. This is what I am. His eyes back to focus. Look at the follow-up part. Secondly, you have to find out whether it is necessary to sacrifice to the corresponding existence at a specific time point, and then follow the normal ritual process until you finish reciting your name and prayer sentences. You must remember that you must use giant language, dragon language, elvish language, or ancient Hermes language to communicate with the corresponding existence through their direct connection with natural forces. You can design specific sentences yourself, but you must have those key words: pray, gaze, dedication, country, gate, and open. Finally, you use spiritual materials, combined with the shock of natural forces caused by mantras, to build a preliminary channel and connect to the channel corresponding to the existence of the national gate. If that person is interested, your sacrifice can be completed. This step is not necessary. If you can make the corresponding existence very interested, then as soon as you recite the mantra, he will open the national gate and build a stable channel by himself.